It is early May 2026. You pull into a gas station, turn off your engine, and stare at the numbers on the sign. The national average for a gallon of gasoline has locked in between $4.18 and $4.23. If you are driving in California, that number is likely staring back at you at a brutal $5.97. You swipe your card, and as the numbers on the pump climb higher and higher, you might pull out your phone and look at the financial news. The headlines tell a completely different story than the receipt in your hand. The financial anchors on television are reporting that the global price of crude oil is cooling off. Furthermore, the data shows that the United States is currently pumping out a staggering 13.6 million barrels of crude oil every single day. Let that number sink in. 13.6 million barrels every 24 hours. We are a nation absolutely awash in crude oil. The supply at the source is massive. The raw material is abundant. So, why are you going broke at the pump? If we have so much oil, and the global price of that oil is dropping, why is your local gas station still charging you over $4 a gallon? The answer is the biggest illusion in the modern energy market. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of what you are actually buying. You see, you do not buy crude oil, and you certainly cannot put crude oil into the gas tank of your crossover SUV. Crude oil, in its raw, extracted state, is completely useless to the American driver. It is thick, toxic, and unrefined. Before it can power your commute, it has to be chemically altered, boiled, cracked, and transformed. To understand why the price of gasoline is so disconnected from the price of crude oil, we have to look at the middleman. We have to look at the refinery. Think of it like the supply chain of a bakery. Imagine you live in a city where the price of a loaf of bread has suddenly skyrocketed to $10. People are furious. They point to the farms outside the city and say, "Look, we just had the biggest wheat harvest in history. We have mountains of wheat. How can bread be $10? The farmers are doing their job perfectly. The raw material is there. But what if the city only has one tiny oven? It does not matter if you have 1,000,000 tons of wheat. If your oven can only bake 100 loaves of bread a day, the supply of bread will be scarce, and the price of that bread will remain incredibly high. In the American energy market, crude oil is the wheat, and the oil refinery is the oven. Right now, the United States has an absolute mountain of wheat, 13.6 million barrels a day, but our ovens are broken, missing, or deliberately turned off. We have created what economists and supply chain experts call a bottleneck. A bottleneck occurs when the capacity of an entire system is strictly limited by a single component. The system can only move as fast as its narrowest point. And right now, the narrowest point in the entire global energy grid is the American refining sector. So, what happened to the ovens? If we look closely at the data leading up to the May 2026 price surge, we find a catastrophic reduction in processing power. Leading into the spring, the American refining system lost approximately 800,000 barrels per day of refining capacity. 800,000 barrels, erased from the grid. Where did it go? It was a combination of massive, overlapping failures and strategic corporate decisions. Several aging facilities were forced to shut down for delayed critical maintenance. Other facilities, citing the high cost of environmental compliance and the projected future of electric vehicles, were simply shut down permanently and liquidated. When you instantly remove 800,000 barrels of daily processing power from a system that is already running hot, the entire market fractures. This is the exact moment the disconnect happens. This is why the stock market ticker on your phone doesn't match the digital sign at the gas station. The producers in Texas and North Dakota are pulling millions of barrels of crude out of the ground. The supply is high, so the price of raw crude drops. But that crude hits a brick wall at the refineries, because we are missing 800,000 barrels of daily capacity. The refineries simply cannot convert that crude into gasoline fast enough to meet the demands of hundreds of millions of American drivers. The raw material is abundant, but the finished product, the gasoline, is critically scarce. And in economics, scarcity dictates the price. This bottleneck is the ultimate weapon. It dictates everything. It doesn't matter how cheap the crude oil gets. If it can't get through the bottleneck, the relief will never reach your local gas station. But wait. If you watch the financial news, you will hear industry spokespeople claim that there is no problem. They will point to a very specific metric, claiming that refineries are actually operating at near record efficiency, almost 90% capacity. They are using a mathematical illusion to hide the truth. And while they point at that illusion, millions of barrels of the fuel we desperately need are quietly being drained from our borders. In Part 2, we are going to break down the math of the utilization illusion and expose the massive 14 million barrel export drain that is keeping your local gas station running on fumes. If you turn on the financial news during a gas price crisis, you will inevitably see an industry spokesperson defending the energy companies. They will look directly into the camera and confidently state that the refineries are doing everything they possibly can. To prove it, they will cite a very specific statistic. They will tell you that American refineries are currently operating at a utilization rate of roughly 89.6%. To the average viewer, 89.6% sounds incredibly high. It sounds like an ominous. It creates the impression of a system that is running hot, working overtime, and pushing its equipment to the absolute limit to help the American consumer. It makes it seem like the high prices at the pump are simply an unavoidable tragedy of high demand, and that the energy sector is performing flawlessly. But this number is a masterclass in mathematical deception. It is an illusion designed to hide the bottleneck we just uncovered. When you hear that utilization is at 89.6%, you are not hearing the whole truth. That percentage only calculates the capacity of the facilities that are currently in operation. It completely ignores the facilities that have been shut down. It does not account for the 800,000 barrels of daily refining capacity that was taken offline leading into the spring of 2026. Let us go back to our bakery. Imagine a city that has 10 large ovens to bake its bread. 2 of those ovens break down and are permanently dismantled. The bakery owners fire up the remaining 8 ovens and run them at 90% of their maximum heat. When the citizens complain that there is a massive bread shortage and prices have tripled, the bakery owners point to the thermometer and say, "Look, we are running at 90%. We are doing our best." They are telling the truth about the temperature of the remaining ovens, but they are lying by omission about the overall capacity of the bakery, because those 2 ovens were destroyed. Running the remaining 8 at 90% still leaves the city with a catastrophic shortage of bread. This is exactly what is happening in the American refining sector. By erasing the 800,000 missing barrels from the equation, the industry creates an artificial baseline. Even if the active refineries were pushed to 100% utilization, They physically could not produce enough gasoline to satisfy the national demand. The baseline capacity has simply been shrunk too far. So, our internal system is constrained. The ovens we do have are struggling to keep up, and the American driver is paying a massive premium for the limited gasoline that trickles out. Logic would dictate that in a moment of domestic scarcity, every single drop of fuel produced would be kept inside the country to flood the local markets, ease the bottleneck, and bring street prices down. But logic does not drive the global energy market. Profit does. Look at the export data from early May 2026. While American drivers were suffocating under prices of $4.20 a gallon and nearly $6 in California, massive, silent river of fuel was flowing out of the country. The data shows that the United States was exporting a staggering 14.18 million barrels of total fuel products every single day. Within that massive outflow, crude oil exports alone accounted for approximately 6.44 million barrels per day. Exporting energy is a normal and necessary part of the global economy. In times of extreme surplus, when our domestic tanks are overflowing, selling fuel overseas brings in massive revenue and balances the trade deficit. Under healthy conditions, it is a sign of industrial strength. But May 2026 was not a time of surplus. We were in the middle of a brutal, manufactured bottleneck. Our local gas stations were starving for refined product. By exporting over 14 million barrels of fuel every day while our domestic market was critically short, the industry was actively draining the exact resources needed to stabilize our own prices. It is the equivalent of a city experiencing a severe drought. The local reservoirs are emptying, citizens are placed on water rations, and they are paying a massive premium just to drink. Yet, every single afternoon, the water company loads up thousands of tanker trucks and sells the remaining water to a neighboring country because the foreign buyers are willing to pay slightly more. For the massive energy conglomerates, this dynamic is highly profitable. They are not bound by national borders. They are bound by quarterly earnings reports. They sell the refined product globally to the highest bidder. Meanwhile, the severe constraint left behind in the United States market keeps domestic prices sky-high, maximizing their profit margins on whatever fuel they do decide to sell locally. The combination of the missing 800,000 barrels of refining capacity and the massive 14 million barrel daily export drain has completely broken the safety net of the American fuel system. We are a nation running on fumes, completely exposed to the slightest market panic. When a system is this strained, it has to pull from its emergency savings. And right now, those savings accounts are crashing. In Part 3, we will look at the terrifying collapse of our national fuel inventories. We will explore the loss of the inventory buffer and explain exactly how the rockets and feathers pricing trap guarantees that the cost of your groceries, your deliveries, and your daily life will remain artificially high long after the news cycle moves on. Every healthy, functioning supply chain relies on a safety net. In the energy market, that safety net is called an inventory buffer. When a refinery breaks down, or a pipeline freezes, or a sudden surge of holiday travelers hits the road, the system does not panic. Instead, it simply reaches into massive, strategic storage tanks and pulls out the reserve fuel. This inventory buffer absorbs the shock. It keeps the supply steady, and more importantly, it prevents the price at your local gas station from violently spiking overnight. But by late April 2026, the American inventory buffer had effectively collapsed. because we were missing 800,000 barrels of daily refining capacity and simultaneously exporting over 14 million barrels of fuel out of the country every day. The system could not keep up with basic domestic demand. To keep the gas stations from running completely dry, the industry was forced to drain its emergency savings accounts at an alarming rate. The data from this period paints a terrifying picture of a system running on empty. In a single reporting window, domestic gasoline inventories plummeted by approximately 6.1 million barrels. Crude oil inventories fell by about 6.2 million barrels. And critically, supplies of diesel fuel declined by roughly 4.5 million barrels. We had lost our shield. We were a nation living paycheck to paycheck on our fuel supply, with absolutely zero margin for error. This complete lack of an inventory buffer is the structural reality behind the most hated phenomenon in the economy, the rockets and feathers pricing trap. As we covered in our previous investigations, when wholesale gas prices jump, the price at the pump shoots up like a rocket. But when the market cools, street prices float down slowly, like a feather. For years, drivers have suspected this was purely corporate greed. While profit maximization plays a massive role, the refinery bottleneck makes it a mathematical certainty. When there is a sudden supply shock, and you have no inventory buffer to soften the blow, the price skyrockets instantly. It acts as an economic brake, forcing people to buy less fuel so the system does not run completely dry. But why doesn't the price drop immediately when raw crude oil gets cheaper? Because to lower the street price, the system does not just need to meet the daily demand of American drivers. It needs to produce a massive surplus. It has to refine enough gasoline to fill up your car, and then refine millions of extra barrels to refill those depleted storage tanks. And that brings us right back to the broken ovens. How can the system possibly generate a massive surplus of gasoline to refill the safety net when we are permanently missing 800,000 barrels of daily refining capacity? It cannot. The system is structurally incapable of catching up. Therefore, the prices remain stuck at the top, hovering like a feather, waiting for an inventory rebuild that is mathematically impossible under current conditions. The consequences of this bottleneck go far beyond the cost of filling up your passenger car. Remember that 4.5 million barrel drop in diesel inventories. Diesel is the lifeblood of the American supply chain. It powers the freight trains, the 18-wheeler trucks, and the massive cargo ships. Distribution networks operate continuously. They cannot simply park their fleets and wait for fuel prices to drop. They are forced to pay the massive premiums, and they immediately pass those exact costs on to you. This means the refinery bottleneck is directly inflating your grocery bill. It increases the cost of building materials, medical supplies, and every single package delivered to your front door. The longer the refineries remain constrained, the more these elevated transportation costs permanently bake into the retail pricing of the broader economy. The high price of gas is not an isolated event. It is a tax on everything you consume. So, the next time you see the financial anchors celebrating a drop in the global price of crude oil, do not celebrate. Do not assume relief is on the way to your local pump, unless you hear that massive new refining capacity has miraculously come online, or that the millions of barrels of exported fuel are being redirected to fill our domestic inventory tanks. The narrative is an illusion. We have all the crude oil in the world, but until we fix the bottleneck, you will continue to pay a premium for a system that is running exactly the way it was designed to run. Thank you for watching the Cost Pressure Report. We will continue to follow the data.